Welcome to Little Tokyo. I'm your host, Tokyo, and I'm going to be reading some stories today from Reddit, all right? This is actually milliseconds after I filmed my other video that you may or may not have seen. I'll put a link for it right here so you can watch it of me reading True Scary Stories. This is essentially a little bit of a part 2 of the True Scary Stories, except this one is a little bit more of a paranormal kind of theme. Now, one thing I do want to let you guys know is I did ask these people for permission to read their story. I will be putting their usernames here as well as linking them down below in the bio if you guys want to read any of the other stories or posts that they have put out. And if you want to give them and show them some love, we always like that. Also, make sure that you're hitting that subscribe button. I love to grow my little city of Little Tokyo. So if you guys want to join the Little Tokyo gang, I would absolutely love that. All right. And yes. So let's get into the stories. Growing up, I had a pet dog named Monty. He was my mom's dog from a previous marriage, and we shared custody of him with my mom's ex, alternating who had him every week or so. I can't remember the timing well, as I was a child when this happened. Monty died when I was 6. I was in the room when he passed, witnessing the whole thing, from his last breath to him lying motionless on the floor, his eyes open, staring at me. It's an image I don't think I'll ever forget. I'm not sure how long after his death this happened, but I know it was at least a few weeks, possibly even a few months later. Regardless, it was a night I will never forget. For context, the bathroom was at the end of the hall with my bedroom on the right and my parents' bedroom directly opposite mine to the left of the bathroom. And behind the gate was a third bedroom with the airing cupboard opposite. Past that were the stairs leading to the bottom floor. The night started as normal. I had tea, went up to bed, and fell asleep. I woke up sometime past midnight. I knew this because both of my parents were asleep, and my dad always came to bed much later than my mom and I. As I lay awake, I realized I needed to go to the bathroom, but something was holding me back, a feeling that I should stay in bed and hide. After a few minutes of staring through the crack of my slightly open door, with the feeling of dread only growing stronger, I finally got desperate and decided to risk it. I grabbed my headlamp and turned on the torch and placed the band around my head. Taking one last look around before pulling back my duvet, I jumped off my bed onto the cold wooden floor. I headed to the bathroom, and once I finished, I washed and dried my hands. On my way out, I closed the doors slowly and quietly, not wanting to make any noise, but the horrible feeling returned in full force. I remember turning around, my torch facing the stairs, when I saw a figure so dark it was like a void. It was moving up the last steps and into the hallway. I stood there, frozen, as my torch suddenly switched off. I panicked and pressed the on-off button repeatedly, but it wouldn't turn back on, and the figure kept getting closer. It looked like it was on all fours, with an outline resembling my departed dog, but it was constantly shifting shape, like a blob of water trying to hold itself together. Even without the light, I could somehow see it moving, a shadow of darkness itself. The figure reached the gate, and to my horror, started moving through the metal bars. I was frozen with fear, unable to move, just staring at this thing as it drew closer. Finally, I screamed, and over, so loud, I didn't even hear my mom get out of bed and open her door. She turned on the hallway light and pulled me into her arms as I stood there crying and shaking. "Monty!" I cried, pointing down the hall. "There's nothing there, Erin," she said, trying to soothe me. "There's nothing there." Confused, I pulled back slightly to look for myself, and was right. The figure was gone. At that moment, my torch flickered back on, and the feeling of dread began to fade. Everything went silent and calm. To this day, I don't know what I saw, but something inside me tells me it wasn't my dog. scary. that is actually really scary. If you watch the previous video that I posted, that was true scary stories, but more of a real life element. This is a little bit more on the paranormal side. And I had said that I have dealt with paranormal stuff myself, especially coming from a bruja and witch background from my mother's side. And the formless figure and seeing it, oh my God, the absolute horror. I have so many memories, especially when I was a child and I was practicing, of seeing those figures and seeing this figure. To actually tell you an account and a story, I'm not going to go into too much detail because I don't want the person to be identified, but I'll go more into it. But there was a person where anytime I would look directly at her, there was always a weird vibe and a weird feeling from her, and I would always see a dark blob in the corner of the room on her left side, my right side. And she would always ask me, why do you keep looking over there? And it would always scare me because I was like, I don't know if it's you or the demons you're bringing along with you, but there is something following you, but I couldn't say it because it was too close. I'm not even going to get into it, but the chills. And I stopped practicing after a bunch of events that happened after that. And I just barely have started to regain and tune into a lot of that kind of side and realm of spirituality and witchcraft. So I do not doubt you. It could have been Monty. It could have been something attaching itself to Monty. It could have been anything really, but oh my God, the fear, the light turning out. A brick would have been shat. Okay. All right, so that is our first story. So let's move on to the next one. When this happened, I was 20 years old, back in 1990. I'm almost 55 now. I was a single mom with a toddler, about 2 or 3 years old. We lived in a semi-studio apartment in Stockton, California, right off the 105 freeway. It was semi because there was a partial wall with no door to separate the bedroom area. One day, I was cleaning and vacuuming with my old heavy Electrolux canister vacuum, probably from the 50s or 60s, that someone had given me. Whenever I cleaned, I'd usually turn on an old tabletop stereo I had salvaged from a junk pile destined for the dump. It worked great, but when I finished, the apartment was silent. Wait, what? I must have forgotten to turn the stereo on, so I went over and did so. Another day, I was vacuuming again, and when I stopped, the radio was on a station I didn't usually listen to. I figured I must have hit the wrong button. This radio was ancient, with mechanical push buttons to move the tuning bar, a crude memory system. It was from a time before remotes and was fully mechanical except for the electricity it needed to run. A little backlight would shine on the frequency dial when it was on. Then, another day, the radio changed stations again while I was vacuuming. And once, the apartment was just silent again after I was sure I had left it on. This was getting frustrating. So the next time I went to clean, I turned the radio on very deliberately and pressed number 1 memory button for my station and made absolutely sure the volume was right. I mentally ticked off my checklist. Radio on, volume up, correct station, check, check, check. I glanced at my toddler, who was asleep in the bedroom area, and then started vacuuming. I was happily cleaning, singing along, and forgot about the radio until the song suddenly cut off mid-note as I was across the room. I slowly turned to look at the radio, disbelief creeping in. I turned off the vacuum, and the silence in the apartment seemed to press down on me. I just stood there, staring at the radio glowing innocently across the room. Had someone snuck in and turned the volume down? I felt a little silly, but walked over and tested the volume dial. Sure enough, it was turned all the way down, even though I'd set it halfway. Right? I double-checked my memory. Yes, I was certain. I turned the volume back up, and my favorite station filled the room again, 98.3 KWIN. I stood there for a moment, waiting to see if anything would happen. Nothing did, but I knew something was off because I knew how I said it. I backed away from the radio, watching it the whole time. I flicked the vacuum back on, and while keeping an eye on the radio, I stood there and waited. A minute passed, then 2, then 3, and nothing. I reached for the vacuum handle, trying to stay calm, when suddenly the radio went quiet again. Not with the abrupt silence of a power cut, but a gradual lowering of volume, almost as if someone were turning the dial down slowly. My eyes shot to the radio, my hand jerking away from the vacuum. I watched in horror as the reality hit me. Something was turning the volume down, and it wasn't me. There it sat on the table across the room, the backlight still shining, taunting me with its innocent glow. I slid onto the couch next to me, curled up, knees drawn to my chest. I was shaking, feeling wave after wave of terror. I kept thinking I should go get my son, but I couldn't make myself move. I sat there for at least 15 minutes, my eyes locked on the radio, trying to make sense of what had just happened. There should be no way to adjust the sound level without physically turning the knob, right? Right? I kept reasoning with myself, conveniently forgetting that every time the dial was physically moved to the off position. And why had it changed stations before? You'd have to tune the main dial or press a memory button. I had so many questions. Finally, I got mad. This was my place, and I couldn't stay on the couch forever. After another 15 minutes of working up my nerve, I got up, grabbed the vacuum, and marched over to the radio. I tuned it back, still on my station, then flipped on the vacuum with one hand and held the volume dial with the other, just to be sure. Not even a minute later, I felt the volume knob jerk to the left. I gasped, but held on as it jerked again, back and forth, fighting my grip. The horror built up with each twitch of the knob. This was no internal malfunction. The preset button above the dial suddenly started pressing down, one after another, flipping through stations rapidly. The little backlights flickered from one button to the next, like some scene out of Close Encounters. I could see the buttons moving by themselves. The volume dial twisted again under my finger. The button stopped switching, and it was as if something or someone grabbed the dial and turned it all the way down. Only the hum of the vacuum remained. Yeah, no, not only no, but hell no, I shouted. I reached over, switched the radio off, and watched the backlight go dark. I stared at it a moment longer, then unplugged it, setting the cord on top of the radio in full view. I felt like I was in a horror movie where the ominous music warns everyone but the characters. I sat on the couch again, leaving the vacuum running, thinking, what if it turns back on unplugged? I even debated calling the police, but what would they do? Arrest it? I stared at it for another 20 minutes. Eventually, my son woke up, so I got up to make him something to eat, casting suspicious glances at the radio. The next day, I called around to radio repair shops and described what happened, asking if anything inside could cause this. Every shop said it was impossible. One guy even asked to see it, so I took it to him. He looked spooked and confirmed that there was nothing inside the radio that could move the buttons or dial on its own. When I asked if he wanted to keep it, he half laughed and said, "No thanks, that's too freaky." The radio never turned itself on again. 3 days later, I gave it to some friends of a friend who were into freaky stuff. I told them everything. Oddly enough, it worked perfectly for them. No strange behavior. Great. So was it the apartment? Me? Or the vacuum? Nothing else ever happened. But I have never been as terrified as I was that day. I remember it like it was yesterday. Okay, that was a good one. I really liked that one. So I didn't actually fully read all of these stories. I actually very much skim read all of them. Like this was like a nice hefty amount of writing here, but I'm very good at reading and very good at skim reading. So I read and I liked generally of the story, but I didn't actually see how well written this was. And not only that, of course, creepy. Oh my God. I have an old radio that I actually salvaged from the trash, and it goes as a radio, a record player, a cassette player, a CD player. My husband's so scared of it. I love it. It's so creepy because when you play certain records, especially certain classical musics, even if the record is new, it always slows down and warbles in a very ominous way. And it never does that for any new musics. It never does that for any other records that are even 20, 30 years old, only ever classical music. So I too have a haunted radio. I kind of get the feeling more that your vacuum cleaner may have been haunted. It kind of feels like, or like essentially like a ghost that was like, look, like you already got the vacuum going on. That's so much noise. Like now you got the radio going. Pick one, lady. Or like, let me change this to NPR. Like, I don't know. But definitely very creepy and chilly. This is getting me into that holiday Halloween spirit. I love it. Well, thank you very much for that story. If you ever have any other stories that you'd like me to read, I will do so. All right, on to the next. With Halloween coming up, I was reminded of a story from my childhood. A memory I'd sort of pushed aside until recently. To give some context, I grew up in a rented house with farmland. The owner of the land visited often, as he had a vacation home on the property. He liked my sister and me and allowed us to roam freely, even giving us access to his barn as long as we didn't disturb anything. My sister and I would go in and out of the barn, playing hide and seek, until we started hearing strange noises. I was a bit of a jerk older sister and took advantage of this by telling her the barn was haunted. She was young and easily spooked, so she refused to go near the barn for years. In fairness, I did think there was some kind of spirit on the property. Odd things would happen. Our dog would bark at nothing, the chickens would get randomly spooked, and doors would open or close on their own. There was even a gate with a complicated latch that seemed to open by itself, despite most of my friends struggling to open it. My mom, being very religious, would call them angels and demons instead of ghosts. I just referred to it as our ghost. It seemed harmless, almost protective. For instance, whenever our cats would wander off, they'd always find their way back home. Once, my dad's truck door slammed shut just as he was about to step out, only to spot a rattlesnake beneath. It was as if something was looking out for us. But this story isn't our friendly ghost. It's about something else I didn't know about until we made a reckless mistake. One week, my cousins were visiting. I was really into ghost hunting back then, so I told them the barn was haunted. Being curious kids, we all decided to sneak out one night to investigate. Armed with flashlights, my Polaroid camera, and an old phone, we headed to the barn. My cousins, who grew up with fewer rules, were rambunctious and didn't listen to when I told them not to touch anything. As soon as we got inside, they started jumping on the hay and messing around with the old tractor. I tried to get them to stop, but they ignored me, so I eventually gave up. The barn had a second level where hay was once stored, now an empty, airy space. We all went up there and sat down and tried to initiate contact with the ghost, hoping for a harmless response like a door closing, but nothing happened. In fact, it was completely silent. No sounds from the road, no animal noises, just dead silence. Feeling like our ghost hunt was a bust, I decided we should head back to the house. My sister, who was still in grade school, looked exhausted. I started ushering everyone downstairs, being the last to leave the upper level. That's when I felt a chill creep up my spine. A feeling like I was being watched. I turned around, shining my flashlight into the darkness, but saw nothing. I snapped a Polaroid photo, thinking the eerie lighting might make for a cool keepsake, though I felt a little silly. As I headed down the stairs, I shook the photo to let it develop. One of my cousins stopped at the bottom, talking about a bug on the wall. I glanced at the Polaroid and froze. A shadowy figure was in the corner of the photo, with what looked like 2 feet poking out from the darkness. Snapping out of it, I told everyone to be quiet and started pushing them out of the barn. They asked what was wrong, but I told them to just shut up. Then we all heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps above us, heavy and deliberate, like boots on wood. For a moment, we were too scared to move. But as the footsteps got faster and headed towards the stairs, I grabbed my sister and shoved my cousins out of the door. We bolted out of there, slamming the door shut and locking it. As we backed away, we heard a loud thud against the door, like someone or something was trying to push it open. We ran back to the house. My sister, now sobbing, went straight to our dad, waking up both of my parents. My mom was upset, thinking we just played a prank to scare my sister. Despite her attempts to explain, my mom wasn't having it. We were officially banned from going into the barn. Honestly, I was relieved. Whatever was in there didn't like intruders, and it made it clear that we were no longer welcome. I still don't know what we encountered, but I knew it wasn't our usual friendly ghost. This was something else, something darker. I got the feeling that if I ever stepped foot into that barn again, I'd end up hurt or worse. Years later, I took my senior photos near the barn, but even then, it felt like being too close for comfort. That was good. That was a good one. All right, so we love ourselves a Casper the Friendly Ghost. We love friendly ghosts, okay? They do exist. They do exist. And it's kind of interesting of like the mother saying the whole thing of, she didn't call it a ghost, she called it angels and demons, which is something that I kind of always kind of give more of the thing of ghost or paranormal things happening. I call it angels and demons, just because especially when you think about like the Bible and religion, a lot of that is used to explain things that were not understood. And also with that kind of being said, one of the things when I was younger and I would try to think like about myself, about situations I was in, things growing up that a kid should not grow up with, and me trying to actually think about it. And I was never able to fully think about it. And the thought or the process of kind of thinking about those emotions and the things I was going through would always be like pulled away from me. And as a kid, I used to say, oh, the angels took it. So it was like the angels took those thoughts from me because I'm not ready to learn about that stuff. And it's kind of true, especially with, pandemic happening, going through therapy, uncovering hidden memories that, were me trying to process at a young age, but me not ready to. And essentially now I kind of know like, oh, I was disassociating. My memory was being blocked out essentially in order to protect myself. And at the time I would say the angels took it because I didn't know what was happening. So kind of angels demon kind of thing. And even now there's certain things where I'm like, oh, the fairies took it, the angels took it, and different things where I know there is an explanation. But it's kind of interesting of the mother kind of having that same kind of parallel of demons and angels instead of ghosts, which is honestly kind of interesting. It's a small world. It's a small world. All right, so that's going to be it for this video right here. I hope you like this one. Please make sure that you watch the previous video that I did and also the next video that should be coming out soon. If you guys like these scary stories, then I might actually do a few more before Halloween comes up, which again, it's around the corner. So I might do a little Halloween spectacular or something, might dress up, who knows. But if you like this, please make sure that you hit that subscribe button, give me a like. It was nice for you guys to visit Tokyo in Little Tokyo, join the Tokyo gang, and I hope to see you guys again. Bye.